Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Lucas Fox live webinar series, Buying Your Dream Home in Spain. My name's Jonathan.Watson. I'm one of the senior traders at Lumon, International Payment Specialist, and I'm your host this evening to discuss all things property and Spain. Got an exciting evening planned to help take you one step or maybe a few steps closer to living that dream. My father has a place in the Costa Calida, and I take every opportunity I can to get over there. I love the weather, the food and the people too. I'm broadcasting from London tonight where it's 1 degree, so it'd be very nice to be over in Spain where I think it's maybe even up in the 20s at the moment in some places. So yes, we've got some experts who are going to be joining us this evening who live and breathe the Spanish life, and they're also specialists in their respective fields. So I'll shortly hand over to them for their introductions, but before then, just some information for you, the audience. We want this evening to be as interactive as possible, so please use the question box there to raise any questions that you have as we go through the evening. We will do our best to try and get through all of them. We've also had some questions submitted beforehand prior to the session, and we will be going through some of those. But it's always good to get people participating live. We may not be able to get through all of the questions, but we will be sharing all of our panelists' contact information plus a recording of the session for you to work back through and to speak to our panelists in more detail. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to hand over now to our panelists. Firstly, over to Mo Butt, Director at Lucas Fox, our Spanish property expert.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So thank you for the introduction, Jonathan. As you mentioned, my name is Mohammed Butt. I'm the Barcelona office director for Lucas Fox Barcelona. Indeed, as you said, much warmer than the 1 degree that you're enjoying in London at the moment. Is definitely a bit better weather. And I've been over now in Spain for 13 years, so definitely enjoying the lifestyle and certainly the weather as well. And yeah, enjoying the property side of things alongside the weather.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Thank you very much, Mo. And then Fransico Mercaadal, Managing Partner at Mercaadal Abogados, our legal experts. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. My name is Fransico Mercaadal. I'm a Spanish real estate lawyer, and I'm based in Palma de Mallorca. Even though we provide services all over Spain, we have here 18 degrees. So I guess a little bit better weather than where our audience is, and happy to answer all the questions you may have.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Francisco. And Kevin Munger, founding partner and MD at Premier Mortgage Consultants, Mortgage Direct, our mortgage expert for the evening.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone. I'm one of the founders of Mortgage Direct. We've been in the mortgage market in Spain now for 20 years, working with Lucas Fox for more than a decade. When you get to my age, you start talking about decades rather than years. So we're focused only on Spain. We've got a team of brokers, 25 qualified advisors, different nationalities. We've got 8 languages that we speak in the team. Yeah, the majority of our clients are Brits, Dutch, and Americans, but we can service clients from all around the world.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Kevin. And myself, Jonathan, I'm a currency dealer for Lumon. As I say, we're an international payment specialist looking after people moving money in and out of Spain and all over the world. I've been at Lumon for 15 of our 24 years of trading, and I've handled the currency side of international properties transactions for that time, as well as a really good understanding of the Spanish buying process and what prospective buyers will be going through. I'm also very interested in the foreign exchange market, and I once appeared on BBC News discussing Brexit with Clive Myrie. So one of the things you like to do in these webinars is just to find out a little bit more about you, our audience, just to try and see what sort of position you might be in to put forward an offer. Of course, buying a Spanish property doesn't happen overnight. I would point out the Spanish buying process can be much faster than some other places in the world, certainly in the UK or some other European countries. It can drag on for many months. In Spain, things can happen very quickly, but it can take a little bit longer as well. So yes, it's just useful for us to understand where in that buying process you might be from a financial point of view. Certainly from the currency side of things, that's very important. exchange rates are changing literally every second, day by day. So there can be a difference in the rates from putting in your offer in to that completion. So it's quite useful to look at some of the different options you might have to lock in on currency. And it's also important to understand the timelines of that buying process and how that's going to work for you. So thank you very much, everyone who has answered that poll. And then I'm going to launch one more, just looking at whereabouts in the world you might be joining us from today. The Spanish buying process will be the same wherever you're buying from all over the world. But yes, it's useful for us to know whereabouts you might be, because there can be slight nuances relating certainly to the currency front and other aspects that it's quite helpful for us to cover on these webinars. So I can see, yeah, about 25% from the UK, about 30% from America. It's certainly a good time for the pound and the dollar against the euro. There'll be more on that later. But yes, thank you very much, everyone who's answered those polls. And right, let's dive into some questions. So I think, Mo, if we can start with you, let's sort of take this really to the basics. Just for someone starting out on their search, what really are the first sort of steps people should be doing? What's the sort of early steps people would be taking to start on this journey?
I think for me, the first thing to determine is actually where they want to buy in Spain. Obviously, Spain's a big country, and sometimes people get a little bit confused in regards to where they want to be living, where they want to be buying. So that's the first thing to really drill down into and establish the location. I think that's the most important thing. And then when, as you mentioned just now on the poll, timeframes can differ a lot. Transactions vary in the length of time that they take. So these are the two things really to get very, very well defined in terms of where you want to be living or where you want to be starting your search and in what time frame are you looking at. Because again, if it's something like, for example, now we're coming into the end of November, early December, and you said, right, I want to be looking at sort of summer next year, then a lot can change in 6, 7, 8 months time in terms of the availability of units on the market or in currency exchange or even global political events. So I think the first thing is to look at where you want to be buying and when as well, and what sort of time frame you're looking at.
Okay, thank you, Mo. And should people be doing that remotely, or is it best to come and visit? What's the best idea there?
For sure, you can definitely start it remote. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in Spain to start the search. Obviously, now with everything's online anyway, so you can definitely start the search online in regards to looking at different types of property, different types of location, different price points, sort of establishing how much use you're going to get out of the apartment as well, or the property per se. And then sort of drilling how much you want to spend on that property as well. And then once you sort of have those things clear in your mind, then we can start looking at, okay, specific property characteristics, and then how are you going to finance it, or if it's going to be a cash purchase, timelines. So definitely start some online research and have a look at the various different portals or the websites of those international agencies. Is a good starting point, I think.
Okay, yes, that's very helpful. So let's just take an example then. You found your sort of dream home and you make that offer. What does it look like then? Say once an offer's been accepted, what's the actual buying process for Spain, please?
I think if we just maybe take it one step back. So I think if you found the property that you want to make an offer on, the typical way that it would work is that you'd present your offer in the form of a letter of intent, whereby that document outlines the advertised price, the offer price that you're willing to sort of present forward to the selling party. Typically, all the good quality agencies will charge maybe a 1% good faith deposit held in their account to go ahead and present that offer as well, to make sure that it's a serious offer. It will also outline the timelines of concluding that purchase as well. So that would be the first format. Once you've sort of opened the lines of communication with a broker or an agency and presented that first offer, once that is accepted and you have a price agreement, then you go to the second stage, which typically is called, for resale properties, an ARAS contract, whereby that again will outline in further detail all of the information regarding the property and timelines on when you're looking to complete on the purchase. And if that is cash or financing, that's where the timelines can differ a little bit. If it is financed, obviously, hopefully you'll get someone like Kevin and his team involved that will help source, obviously, the best potential financing deal for you. and then timelines sort of depend on how quick you are in getting everything over to the brokers and the banks, the risk department, getting everything sort of finalized. But typically we say to clients from ARAS, you're looking at around 3 months by the time they've done the bank valuation and got all the paperwork in line. And that's the basic 3 steps. Letter of intent, within 2 to 3 weeks an ARAS contract, and if it's financed, within sort of 3 months from that day, getting the transaction concluded at the notary.
That's fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, Mo, for explaining that. Francisco, let's come over to you. I was going to ask you a little bit about legal fees, and I've just seen a live question submitted from Murray Cole asking about stamp duty and government fees. So yes, just looking at everything Mo's just given us about that buying process from a legal aspect, and I guess it's always a common question, you know, fees and this type of thing. What extra points would you add with that buying process for prospective buyers to consider?
So since we have in Spain 17 regions, that depends on the region you want to buy. So Balearics have a tax that starts from 8% to 13% on property transfer tax. Barcelona has a different property transfer tax, Madrid has another one, Andalusia has another one, every region has a different one. So that would be more to answer depending on where the buyer wants to place the offer, and then we would be able to have the numbers. Then besides that, on the legal fees, well, these taxes are paid usually within 1 month after the purchase price. This is the time frame. If there is a mortgage, the bank will take these fees right at the notary, will collect all the fees to pay these taxes and register the property completely under the purchaser name. But for what concerns the legal fees of the transaction, there's notary involved, land registry, which have a small percentage that depends on the cost of the transaction, but minimum would be 750, something like this for the notary, up to depending on the purchase price. And then land registry minimum 500, 750 as well. And then depending on the kind of property that the buyer wants to buy, we also recommend to engage an architect to perform a due diligence, especially if it's a villa, so they get a full survey of the things they're buying, not only from the construction, but also from the urbanistic point of view, so that the house has all the licenses, or if it's not, then at least they have a full disclosure of what they're buying. And then the legal fees for lawyers, it varies depending on the lawyer. It goes from 1 to 1.5 of the purchase price. In our case, in our firm, we work with 1% usually, typically, but we also have a minimum fee depending on if the transaction is a lower price, then we go on the minimum.
Okay, Francisco, that's really helpful. So I guess to the audience and to Murray, thank you for your question. Yes, it's best just to speak to the relevant agent that you're in touch with and the local lawyer for your area, just to try and get the real detailed information. And I think a theme for these webinars often is, you know, speaking to the panelists directly to really get the detail. We'll give you a flavour of lots of this, but yes, speaking to people directly always helps. So Kevin, let's come across to you. You know, as I understand it, generally the mortgage is going to be quite an early idea in the process, isn't it? Because how do you know what your budget is if you haven't researched the mortgage side of things? But yes, what's the sort of buying process from your point of view? You know, anyone looking at getting a mortgage, what should they be thinking about early on, Kevin?
My advice always is that if you need a mortgage, or you may not need a mortgage, but if you're thinking about it, contact a mortgage broker such as ourselves, because you want to try and understand exactly what you can borrow. That might mean that you can go ahead at the price level you're thinking about, or it might allow you to extend the price, increase the price somewhat. But it's a crucial part of the process, obviously, that you find out, am I going to be eligible? Because the rules in Spain are different to other countries. And it's important that you know before you dive into going on visits with people at Lucas Fox, with Mo and so on, that you understand, am I going to qualify? And you need to know, roughly speaking, what the amount would be. And then that means that when you go and speak to your real estate agent, you've got the information and you know that you're not going to be looking at properties that you can't afford.
Very good. And I know the European Central Bank has cut interest rates, and certainly interest rates are lower in the Eurozone than they are, well, certainly in the UK and the US and other countries. So what sort of rates are on offer at the moment? Are they expected to come down again? I mean, what's the outlook there?
Well, in terms of the outlook, there is whispers in the industry that the ECB, the European Central Bank, will reduce rates again. They've reduced them twice just in the last few months. Currently, the deposit rate is at 3.25%. That's not the mortgage rate, but that's the reference rate that the banks use when they're setting their own rates. So at the moment, the average in Spain is between 3 and 3.25%. That's for a fixed interest rate for 20 years. Here in Spain, unlike in many other countries, you can have an interest rate which is for the whole term of the mortgage. So between 3 and 3.25%, that would be fixed for 20 years. That's a standard kind of mortgage that we'd have here in Spain. In terms of how Spain compares to other countries, I think the average rate in America is somewhere between 6.5 and 7%. So we're less than half. In the UK, I think it's somewhere between 5 and 5.5. In the Eurozone, I think Spain is one of the lowest in terms of the interest rates by country. I think France and Belgium are lower, but other countries are all higher. So it's very attractive borrowing in Spain.
Fantastic. And I mean, I know from my own research looking at the Eurozone economy, the Spanish economy has been really doing well this year. I think it's outperformed pretty much every other country in the Eurozone. So that's great that you're getting those very favourable borrowing rates for an economy that's really performing well. So that's good to know. So what sort of paperwork are people going to need to be getting together, Kevin, to make the application?
The paperwork, I think nowadays, pretty much in any country where you want to apply for a mortgage, is quite standard. So let's assume you're an employed person. They'll ask you for your pay slips, usually the last 3 to 6 pay slips. The same for the bank statements, the last 3 to 6 months. So that'll be last 3 to 6 months pay slips, because some people are paid bi-weekly or weekly as well. In addition to that, you're going to be asked to provide a credit report from your home country. You have to get that yourself, because the banks in Spain can't get access to credit reports outside of the borders of Spain. They'll also want to see evidence of your assets and liabilities. If you have a mortgage, they'll not only want to see the credit report, but they'll want to see the latest annual mortgage statement. They'll want to see proof of funds for the purchase. They'll want to see, obviously, your identification documents. And they'll want to see rental contracts if you have properties that you rent out. So depending on the complexity of your profile, there might be other things that they also request.
Okay, so to take advantage of those good rates, get in touch with you nice and early and get all the paperwork organised. Sounds like a good idea. Okay, Mo, well, let's come back to you. And I'm actually going to go to one of our live questions, because we've had 2 people mentioning this already, and we did actually mention it offline as well. It's all to do with this golden visa. So we've actually had Mauricio Rodriguez, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. It says, I'm living in Spain near the Lucas Fox office in San Just Desvern, Barcelona. I have a task assignment from my brother to search for a property to take advantage of the golden visa, but I know the golden visa is ending in 2025. So yes, what's the advice there, please, Mo?
Definitely come and see us in the lounge first and foremost. If he's living there, that'd be a good starting point. Maybe more of a relevant question for Francisco, but you're right. I mean, since they have announced the scrappage of the golden visa scheme, we have seen a huge uptake in buyers without European Union nationality making inquiries and actually concluding, making decisions much quicker and getting everything to the notary as quick as they possibly can. Obviously, normally these guys tend to be cash buyers, which they need to be at the minimum level of the $500,000 anyway. But everything over that amount can be financed. But what we are seeing right now is people really rushing to get the property transaction concluded and starting the legal application for the visa. At the moment, there's no definitive date on when it will stop. So I think the general consensus is don't stop, get everything done, get the transaction concluded and start the application process ASAP. So I think for anyone that is sort of looking at getting the visa, they need to move pretty quick.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Mo. And Francisco, what's your take on all of this, please?
Exactly as Mo said, today better than tomorrow. And there's no much room for questions for the golden visa, because That started when the president of Spain announced the golden visa was going to be removed, and that was in June. And then the rumor started, but nobody knew exactly when it's going to be passed. Now the announcement is there, and it's likely going to be towards the end of the year. So, as Mo said, is the time, if they don't have a property yet, to purchase immediately for at least 500,000 euros per buyer with their own funds, and then submit all the paperwork to submit the application. But not much time or room for questions, because there's a lot of applications going at the moment, and the information needs to be very clear, and the documents that needs to be provided need to be quick. So, because the time is running. So, and there's holidays in between, so we need to really run. We have tons of applications at the moment, so it's a little bit stressful with the golden visa. Yes.
Okay, get in touch quickly on the golden visas. And Mauricio's actually added another question saying, can you invest in properties that you're not using but renting for the golden visa?
Francisco, or is that for me? I mean, we have dealt with a lot of international clients who've used, they bought a property, they haven't used it themselves, it's purely for rental, but they're utilizing the purchase for applications for the golden visa. So I think in short, the answer to that question is yes.
Okay, that's perfect. We've had another live question saying, can I have the panelists' contact details? Yes, everyone who's signed up for this webinar, even if you're not watching it live, if you're watching it back, you will have an email with all of the panelists' contact details on. So yes, thank you for reminding us that will be something we'll be doing. Now, I've had a question here about the currency side of things, and it's just really relating to a common question. How does Lumon know what might happen in the future with the market? When is a good time to buy? Well, unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what the FX market's going to do in the future. And it's not just because I don't know, it's because no one on this planet knows precisely what markets will do in the future. The currency market is just a reaction to what is happening globally, whether it's political news, economic news, other factors as well. So what we do when we have a new client, we will speak to them about what is going on in the world, all the latest trends and developments. If we're looking at pound euro levels at present, you're at a 2.5-year high. Say if you look at the dollar to the euro, that's been over a 13-month high. So we'll point out a lot of the facts that are in the market, and then we can get a bit deeper. And we can actually share research from about 50 leading banks to try and demonstrate where the market might be headed. So if we look at pound euro levels over the next 3, 6, and 12 months, our research from looking at 50 different banks and their forecast data does actually suggest a slight deterioration in the rate. So for some clients, and we can't directly advise you, but you can absolutely argue that looking at the majority of the forecasts, they do predict a slight decline for the pound euro rate over the next 12 months. It's largely because the Bank of England is expected to be cutting interest rates more aggressively going into 2025. Like I say, there's no guarantees of this. And if we look at the spread of the predictions, the highest forecast is about 2 cents higher. That's coming in from leading bank, and then the lower forecast is about 4 cents lower. That's actually over the next 3 months. So what we can do is paint a picture for you as a client and say, we can't tell exactly what's going to happen, but based on the evidence that we have, you could argue you're in a much better time to buy because there's more risk of the rate getting worse than better. But as I say, we'll always have a sort of open, honest conversation with the client, explain that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and just try and assess your attitude to risk. So some clients will want to be a bit more defensive. They may not want to take any risk that the rates could move against them. They want to know exactly what their property is going to cost them, and we can help to lock in a rate quite early on in the process. Other clients might want a bit more of a speculative approach. They might want to try and hit some of those higher rates if we are going to see the market going higher, and we'll work very closely with them to keep them updated essentially as to what the market's doing. So yes, hope that answers the question. I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you exactly what the market's going to do. Unfortunately, I don't. No one on this planet knows exactly what the rates are going to do, but it's very important to be in touch with a specialist like myself at Lumon to keep you updated so you can react accordingly. So hope that answers your question. Kevin, let's turn to you. We've had a live one here from Lou D. This looks like a US client looking potentially at a mortgage. Can a foreigner obtain a Spanish mortgage by leveraging an asset portfolio based in the US? I'm 56 years old. What is the longest mortgage rate I can qualify for?
Okay, right. So typically speaking, the retail banks don't do those types of products. They've just started in recent years. Some of the main banks in Spain will do what they call Lombard loans. This is not a mortgage. It's a loan which is leveraged against assets rather than property. But you can get a mix of the two. So we've got some wealthy clients. Generally speaking, it's the wealthier clients who may not qualify in using the typical affordability stress test. So they're asset rich but income poor, but they're not poor people by any stretch. But yes, nowadays there are some options. It's quite a complex thing to certainly discuss on this call. So I would advise anybody that has assets in their home country that they would like to leverage. Generally speaking, what is required is that assets need to move. There are some ways. I'm not sure about the US. I think it's a lot more tricky. But when we've got European clients, for example, banks can have standby letters and credit letters, so that allows banks to lend money to clients with a promise from the client's bank that in the event that the client didn't pay the mortgage or the loan, that client would immediately pay the lending bank. Like I say, it's a very complex thing to discuss, and each client will have their own profile. So we would recommend that you get in touch with us, and there probably are definite possibilities for that.
Okay, thank you for taking that one on, Kevin. And yeah, Lou, it sounds like it's good for you to set up a call there with Kevin and anyone else interested in mortgages. So good to have a proper conversation about your requirements. So Mo, let's come back to you in terms of the buying process. Of course, Lucas Fox, you look after the whole of Spain. Are there any particular popular areas that you're seeing at the moment? Any sort of up and coming areas? Any clients should be aware of?
Yeah, I think a lot of it actually depends. What we've noticed as a trend is it depends on whether people are moving here, so it's for their primary residence, or if it's a second holiday home or investment. So I think what we found is that if it's for their primary residence, it tends to be more city market based, so places like Barcelona, Madrid, or Valencia. If it's more holiday home, then places like Costa Brava, Costa Blanca, or the islands like Mallorca or Ibiza. So a lot of it comes down to the client, really, in terms of how much use and the purpose of why they're actually purchasing. But I think in regards to up and coming areas or investment opportunities, certainly cities like Valencia have seen good quality growth in the last sort of 18, 24 months, certainly. And places like Malaga as well as a city is seeing already a lot of demand and a lot of growth.
Perfect. So I guess again, good for prospective clients to reach out directly to try and understand some of these places. I think where my dad is, Costa Clear, I think it's the top 10 sunniest places in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. So that's certainly an attractive point for me. Francisco, let's come back to you. What are some of the more common legal pitfalls? So, sort of anyone starting out in this process or moving forward, what's some of the sort of pain points you see, people should be aware of nice and early on just to avoid any problems?
Well, I need to say here that many of the clients that contact us, or many of our clients, have some information that is misleading. A lot of people believe that they need to have an EA to start the process or to start the contract, and that is false. To make the offer and to start the contract, you don't need the NIE. You don't need to have the NIE in place. We can do the contract and then have the NIE, which is the tax identification number for non-residents in Spain. That can be done right after the contract. So that's one of the things that people get a little bit confused. The tax identification number don't need to be active, or you don't need to have it before throwing an offer or starting the contract. But to your question, typically the more common ones are when people are buying villas. Not in apartments. You can find some legal mistakes, things that are not correct, but usually when people buy villas, things that are out of the legality. So it's very, very important to have a lawyer by your side that checks the property, that advises, that tells you what it is, so that you don't go, you know, how much time, the question would be, how much time did you take to make the money you're going to spend on the property? Are you going to save on the lawyer? Then it's going to be by your side and make sure that you don't make mistakes when buying that property. I don't think it's worth the saving, right? So because this is not buying shirts or shoes, so this is a big expense, and maybe where people put more money of their savings. So it's very important to have a lawyer by your side. But basically, it's on legality, on things out of the license, things that have been done without license, especially when we go into rustic land, because we have two kinds of land here: urban land, which is where you can build, and rustic land, or what we would say agricultural land. And there, the regulations are more and more restrictive, and clearly you need good advice so you don't get into trouble.
That's good advice there, Francisco. And can you just elaborate a little bit on the NIE number, you know, just for anyone who's unfamiliar with the importance of the NIE number, and perhaps just the process to get that rolling?
Well, typically how we would do it is we need all the details from the client, which is a copy of the passport, name, last names, address, everything, and then mother and father name, even if they're deceased, because we need to fully identify that person. And then typically what we would do is, with the power of attorney, apply for the NIE here. So there's no problem. Depending on if we can get that power of attorney granted, we do it ourselves. Otherwise, we contact the client with the embassy or the consulate that is closer to where the place they live, and they can go there to the consulate of Spain or the embassy of Spain and then get an appointment. We prepare all the paperwork and they just go and submit it and get the NIE. It's an easy process. It's not super complicated. Then you need to pay a little bit of tax to get that done. But it's important when you go to the notary, you need to have an NIE. You can do it with a provisional NIE as well, right? But for when you go with a mortgage, and even without a mortgage, when you go to the final purchase at the notary, you need to have an NIE, because then is where you're going to be, the tax office knows you need to pay taxes, so you need to have a tax identification number.
Perfect. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Francisco. Kevin, let's come back to you. Just in terms of deposits, how does that work? And seeing as you've got a lot of Americans on, you know, perhaps just any implications depending on where buyers are from in the world, please.
Okay. Generally speaking, there aren't that many differences. Well, there aren't differences between where somebody's resident when they're buying. But the typical kind of percentage that you have is based on the purchase price or the valuation. The bank will do a valuation property, and it's the lower of those two amounts is what they base the percentage on, and it's between 60 and 70%. So you're going to be paying, generally speaking, between 30 and 40%, depending on what you're being given as the mortgage. And then on top of that, you have to pay the fees and taxes, which, as Francisco touched upon earlier, the costs, the tax around Spain varies. It can vary between, I think it's 6% in Madrid, and then you can go up to 11% in some of the other regions. So you could be looking anywhere between kind of close to 40% if you're looking at one of the cheaper regions to buy and you get a 70% mortgage, up to anything like 60%. So if you go for a cheaper property, you can end up paying a higher percentage in terms of the costs. Why is that? That's because, as Francisco mentioned, there are lots of people involved in the process where they've got minimum fees. So when you take into account a minimum fee for a lawyer or a mortgage broker on a low price property, when you look at the figures overall, it bumps up the percentage that you're paying in terms of the costs.
Okay, and is there a minimum sort of mortgage that would be available to overseas buyers?
It's usually between sort of 30 and 40,000. You don't rarely see a mortgage under 30,000. The banks just aren't interested these days in those kind of numbers. But we at Mortgage Direct deal with mortgages from probably around the minimum level being around, well, the purchase price, sorry, mortgage would be about 30,000, right the way up to the luxury properties. We've done mortgages 20+ million euros.
Wow. And how is the mortgage market at the moment?
As a business, we're growing. We're growing our team, and based on our experience, and we cover all of Spain, we believe that the market is resilient. There's things happening around Spain at the moment. We've seen a little bit of a dip due to the situation with the weather, but I think we'll be over that. Recovery will be pretty quick from that. And Spain is becoming more and more popular. The economy is buoyant, as you said. Interest rates are low, so we're always growing as a business, and I can't see that changing. And I think the market in general for both mortgages and home buyers is strong, and will continue to remain strong.
I do a radio show for Talk Radio Europe, broadcast in Spain, and giving a currency update. And one of the points we'd covered was say how the Spanish economy has improved so much this year. In the last couple of years, one of the best performing, as I mentioned, in the Eurozone, but also the number of people coming to Spain has really increased. So that's, I'm sure spilling over into the property market, a lot of demand there. So very, very healthy, must be affecting prices. We've had Paul Brock submitting a question here, and I might put this to all three of you, being obviously based in Spain. It's just asking about this 180-day rule. Of course, Brexit has changed things for certainly British coming over to the EU into Spain, the 180-day rule. Are there any views on the panel about how that may possibly change? I say that's a question from Paul Brock about how it's best to manage that.
I think maybe Francisco, that's over to you, more of the from the legal side, maybe.
Yeah, we don't foresee any changes on that rule. So unless you get a golden visa, but the time is running. So if you have a golden visa, you have a different scenario, or then it's okay. But otherwise, we don't foresee any change on the rule, really. Yeah.
No, I mean, my dad's been my father lives in the UK, and he travels over there and he manages it. So I know there's all sorts of little apps and quirky things you can get to help manage that time frame. So yeah, worth paying the price to be able to get those sunny days over in Spain for sure. Mo, let's come back to you. Just in terms of buying property in Spain, obviously generally people are going to be buying a villa or an apartment. Is there any difference in the sort of buying process or any extra implications if you're buying an apartment versus a villa?
I think it's regardless, whatever is the type of property, what we always say to clients is get a good quality lawyer, just because in terms of the due diligence, the paperwork, if you're not accustomed to the Spanish system, it can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming. So I think a good quality lawyer is definitely worth every single penny to help with that process. What we find is with apartments, it's much simpler in terms of the transactions. With houses or villas or anything that has is built on a plot, can be a little bit more complicated. But it all forms part of the due diligence process. And the most important thing is if you're not from Spain or accustomed to the legal framework, definitely get a good English-speaking lawyer from the jurisdiction that you're buying in, who's aware in terms of all the different planning restrictions that can help advise accordingly if there anything does come up that's untoward.
Okay, fantastic. Francisco, I'm going to come back to you. We've had a question about inheritance tax. Of course, if you're buying a property over there, there can be a concern about how things can change in the future. What do clients need to be considering in terms of inheritance tax in a purchase?
Well, this is a very good question because we always advise our clients to do a will in Spain, even if they have a will where they live or where they have most of their assets or whatever, because they can do a will in Spain only for the assets they have in Spain, which would be, property, if they have a car, they have a boat, if they have a bank account or whatever. But it simplifies the process of inheritance a lot. So we really encourage to have a will in case something happens, because otherwise you need to bring the death certificate from where the person passed away. Then you need to bring the will from the country sworn translated with the apostille of La Hague to make it valid in Spain, and maybe go through court to make it even to make the process. So that takes a huge amount of time, which is with another jurisdiction. And the wills that we do here are only for Spain. So if they have another will, let's say in the UK or wherever, or in the US or whatever, that doesn't affect, because this will would be only for Spain. Then when it comes to the inheritance, again, depends on the region. For instance, in the Balearics, the tax from parents to children has dropped to 0 at the moment. This law was passed in the beginning of at the beginning of this year, so now it's 0. In Madrid, is the same. So it depends on the region where the asset is. Then you would have different rates of inheritance tax. But highly recommended to draft a will and sign a will before the notary in Spain.
Okay, thank you very much, Francisco. And I've had a question regarding currency, and it's just asking about the benefits of a currency broker over the banks. So for anyone unfamiliar with a currency broker, and that's what Lumon is, an international payment specialist, the main reason for dealing with me is the exchange rate. We can demonstrate savings against the banks. It's all to do with the volume of currency that we're trading as a business, and it's very simple. Economies of scale. Lumon last year traded about £7 billion worth of currency, so we've got a very strong buying power in the market, and that allows us to undercut the rates of exchange that are offered by banks. But it is a little bit more than that. When you register with Lumon, and that's the very first step in the process, literally just takes a few minutes, you get immediate access to what we call a Euro wallet. So whether you're in the US, whether you're in the UK, wherever you might be in the world, you may not be able to open the bank account in Spain immediately. It's quite easy actually once you've done the NIE number to get that Spanish bank account, but there is a sort of grey period where you may not have a Spanish bank account to actually put any euros that you're going to need. So with Lumon, once you're registered, you can actually use this wallet to purchase euros and then hold them there until you need to make a payment. So this is really important. As I mentioned, pound euro rates have just hit the 2.5-year high, and the rates are changing all the time. So for some of our buyers, they may not be completing on a property for a few weeks, maybe not until the new year, but they've been able to take advantage of the rates, purchase their euros, and they're just holding them in this wallet. Now, when they're needed in Spain, the client will contact us and we'll be able to pay directly to the lawyer, to Francisco, to the agent, wherever those euros need to be sent. It might be to the client's bank account. We can obviously pay directly there as well. Sometimes it's actually better and easier for us to pay directly to the lawyer, because that's cutting out having to put it into your own Spanish bank. You know, the banks in Spain, not going to say anything bad about them. You know, like banks all over the world, they have their positives and negatives, but just like we'd say a bank in the UK or in the US, if you're trying to move a large amount of money, you sometimes need to go into the branch, you sometimes need to make an appointment, there might be extra forms and paperwork. If you've got a large amount of money in your Lumon wallet and you need to get that to your lawyer, it's a very simple process. We can send that amount on a phone call, a quick security check of the amount and yourself, and we'll pay the money direct to the lawyer. So particularly if you're going to be traveling over to Spain for your completion and you're not going to have time necessarily to actually go physically into the bank to then pass your money on to the lawyer, this wallet that we offer can be very helpful. So yes, it's also the service with Lumon. We can give you, as I mentioned earlier, updates on the currency market to try and help with the timing. So those are some of the benefits of a currency broker over the banks. It's very much the exchange rate. If you're talking about a small difference in the rate, 1 cent on £100,000 is an extra €1,000, and sometimes we can beat the banks by 1 or 2 cents, maybe more, depending on what they're actually offering. So we can save you potentially thousands on the property, and then it's the service as well, and to streamline those payments. So yes, if you'd like to find out more, of course, you can contact me about that. Hope that answers the question. Kevin, let's turn back to you. We've had a live question submitted asking about how long it takes to cover a mortgage. We've covered most of the other aspects. How long does it actually take to get this all rolling, please?
Generally speaking, when we're speaking to clients, we say to allow 8 to 10 weeks. You can get a mortgage through quicker than that if you've got an easy profile, a straightforward profile. You know which bank is going to offer the best conditions, so you can focus on that bank. Sometimes when clients are in a bit of a rush, they've got a tight deadline, they come to us and they say, I need to complete within X number of weeks. We might organise a valuation on their behalf. We work with various different valuation companies. We know which banks accept valuations from which companies. So if you organise a valuation at the same time as you actually start the application to the bank, you can save yourself a lot of time and hassle. But 8 to 10 weeks is, generally speaking, the average, I would say. When clients ask us how much time they should put into the ARAS contract, which Mo mentioned earlier on, which is the contract where you commit to buying the property and you put down your 10%, generally speaking, at that point, we say if you can, you should try and have a 3-month deadline. So allowing roughly 12 weeks, just to give yourself that little bit of extra breathing room. But we've had clients where we've been able to do it in less than 6 weeks, for example. We prefer not to have to rush, but sometimes we don't have a choice because the client has committed to a deadline, which is pretty challenging right from the get-go.
Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, so again, very important to be in touch with Kevin and perhaps all the panelists nice and early on in the process, just to understand how these things will work. Right, I've got a question. I'm going to sort of lead with Mo, but it may be that Francisco, or perhaps yourself, Kevin, want to add something in. John O'Donnell is asking about the implications of buying a commercial property, but I think what he's asking is buying a property in the name of a business. He's saying one that's owned by a business. So perhaps you can just run through the mechanics there. You know, we do see this where people actually want to purchase property in Spain in the name of a business.
Yeah, typically getting in touch with a fiscal advisor on how to really structure the purchase is the thing that we advise really early on, because it's much easier to plan and prep and do it well rather than purchase, let's say, in your own personal name and then try and change the property into a company name after the public deed has been signed. So if anyone does want to facilitate a purchase via a company that will be, let's say, a Spanish limited company, so it's known as an SL, maybe that company is then owned by a subsidiary based overseas somewhere. If that's how they want to structure the purchase, the best thing to do is to really speak to what they call a fiscalista or a fiscal specialist, but very, very early on, so we can set up the appropriate structure and facilitate that purchase right from the get-go.
Okay, perfect. Francisco, anything to add there, please?
No, I think it's important to have good advice again, tax advice and legal advice on that side, and also depending on how you want to structure, because there's tax advantages if you do if you build an SL, if you incorporate an SL under the person name, or if it belongs to a subsidiary, like Mo was saying. So there's tax implications on the profit that they will make. So it's very different, and especially because not only for that, because if it belongs to a subsidiary, then there's double tax agreements that needs to be taken into account. So either go to a tax advisor. We have a tax advisor in-house, so we can provide that service from our office, but it's really important to set the structure well. Now, when it comes to purchasing residential property with a company, we get that question very often. There's no much advantage unless you're buying a property that has a touristic license and that you're going to do business with that property, or unless you're going to buy a very high or very expensive property and then you get structures. But that depends again on the double tax agreement of your country, because we have clients, for instance, German clients that are buying with companies in Germany, and there's some tax implications, so that goes case by case, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for that. And we've also got a question about the buying process, once again from Michael Faver Marchesi. He's asking if he can make an offer on a property subject to selling his property. He hasn't said where he's from, but I know in the UK, you know, say he's trying to sell a property in the UK, and can he put an offer into Spain subject to selling in the UK? Would that be a clause that would be possible for prospective buyers? perhaps from the US or the UK? I'll put that to Mo, but anyone else feel free to jump in.
It's not very common here. So I know in England, getting involved in effectively what you described there is a chain. In Spain, it's not very common at all. So typically people are already out of their own property and they've sold it. And effectively, they're either a cash buyer or they still may well take financing, but they haven't got to rely on selling their own property before they go ahead with the purchase. So that's why typically if you are getting financing for buying your property, the max sort of time, as Kevin mentioned earlier, from signing of the ARAS contract is 3 months, because that's the sort of time it takes to get the bank valuation and the bank to issue everything in terms of the paperwork. That's why generally transactions happen pretty fast in Spain, because there's no real such thing as a chain. And that's just how the market operates here.
Okay, well, that's really useful. I've learned something new then. That explains why the market moves quite quickly there, because you don't get the chains. Very good. Okay, good to know. Right, Kevin, not asked you a question for a while. Has Brexit changed anything for British mortgage buyers? Is there any implications of Brexit for mortgages?
No, I think there was a period immediately after the withdrawal that we saw a bit of a dip in the number of British buyers, waiting to see what would happen. And I think the banks as well, they were looking at people from the UK, looking at the exchange rate, thinking, what would be the value of their income going forward? Because if the pound was going to be dropping significantly, obviously there was a pretty significant drop in the value of the pound against the euro, and that concerned the banks. So they did an adjustment when they were doing the affordability stress test. But we're as I mentioned at the start of the call, the Brits are in terms of nationality, the largest group that we deal with. And so, we find that Spain is super popular. It's very close to the UK. British people enjoy traveling as much as anybody else, and they want to own properties in foreign countries. Spain is one of the leading ones, I think, or if not the leading country to buy in. So from our point of view, there's been very little difference. The banks are very happy to have British customers.
Okay, fantastic. We want that place in the sun. We want that warm sunshine on our bodies. So yes, that's the selling point for me anyway. Mo, I've got a really good question here. What's some of the common feedback you hear from buyers post-purchase? What do buyers, at the end of all of this, what do they usually wish they'd known beforehand?
From my experience, it's two things. One was that I wish I'd got a lawyer. Because I think buying a property is stressful regardless wherever you are, even if it's in your own domestic country. But I think certainly buying in a foreign country where maybe it's not your first language or the language at all, you don't understand the process or the paperwork. So getting a good quality lawyer is a must for me. And the second one that I found is that people wish they'd actually borrowed more money. I think, as Kevin touched on earlier, with the rates being so attractive, it doesn't make sense for anyone not to borrow more. If they can actually get the financing from the banks, and I think Kevin will probably agree, the overall appetite from Spanish lenders is very positive, and the rates are very attractive. So I think that's something that's come back from buyers once they've bought. They kind of said, okay, if we could have got a little bit more, if we'd had the view to borrow a little bit more, we could have got either a better property or changed to a different location or got something with better amenities. So that's always something that's come up after they've concluded on their own purchase.
Just worth pointing out, in Spain, unlike in many other countries, releasing capital from a property once you bought it is nigh on impossible. Equity release, as we call it in the UK, forget it. If you think that I'll pay cash and then at a later date you need the money, it just doesn't exist here in Spain as it does in other countries. Probably the one main thing that they'll allow you to do it for is to renovate that specific property. If you think I'm in the UK, I've got a property in Spain, I didn't get a mortgage at the point of purchase, I need that money because for whatever reason it might be, people come to us all the time and say, I want to release some capital, and we have to say, very sorry, unless you're going to renovate the property, it's more or less impossible.
Okay, very good. Thank you all. Right, I've got a question here, just a more generic one for everyone. What are some of the challenges you see for 2025? What are some of the things that prospective buyers need to be thinking about going into the new year? I'll go with you, Mo, first.
I think if everything that happens, which I think if interest rates do decrease further, it's definitely going to be even more of a seller's market, and it has been, I think, certainly for 2024. And I think the whispers are that the rates will decrease. So I think for buyers, the issue is going to be lack of good quality supply of properties coming onto the market, and the prices that the sellers are going to be looking at letting those properties go for. So again, I think it's kind of what I always say to buyers, which is that if it's a good deal today, don't wait for a better deal tomorrow, because you don't know if that property is going to be on the market a week, a month, or 6 months down the line from now. So I think it's definitely going to be a lot more of a shift towards the balance of power towards vendors.
Interesting take. Okay, Francisco.
Absolutely agree with Mo. I mean, I think this is a seller's market, and today better than tomorrow's, because as discussed, I think that this is a seller's market, and sometimes there's a lack of product, as Mo was saying. And when there is one that you like and the price fits your budget, then go for it, because we've been having a very busy year. The forecast for 25, I think it remains the same unless something unforeseen happens, but we can predict that it will be like this onwards too.
Okay, thank you. And yourself, Kevin?
Basically, I mean, if what Mo and Francisco are saying, and I believe them 100%, I think the market will start to heat up. But obviously, with the lack of product, it means you have to get in there quickly in terms of buying the property. So where there's finance involved, a challenge for us would be where we have lots of clients coming to us wanting to act very, very quickly, and sometimes it's not possible to do that because we're dealing with Spanish banks. A good example is in August, one of the main banks that we work with, they completely shut up shop. They're all down at the beach in August, and all the notaries shut their offices as well. So it's a question of timing, making sure when you want to buy a property and you're going to be competing potentially against people that don't need a mortgage, you need to make sure you start the process early.
Very good. Yes, like I mentioned, the Spanish economy has been performing extremely well this year, so it's not surprising we've had a very strong year for Spanish buyers as well, and we can see, yes, there's absolutely that demand there, which should be feeding into the prices, so that'll make sense for me. And the currency perspective, as I'd mentioned, best time in 2.5 years last week to buy euros with pounds, best time in 13 months to buy euros with US dollars. So from the currency perspective, it's become much cheaper effectively to buy in Spain, another strong signal for the buyers. So thank you, everyone. 2025 looking good.
Jonathan, I've just got to jump off for 30 seconds. I'll be back in a second. Yeah.
Thank you, Mo. Well, look, we're getting now to the end of the webinar, everyone. So thank you very much, audience, for joining us. I'm just going to pass back to each of my panelists just for a quick outro and maybe just a little taster, just a little snapshot of advice that you would give to the audience. So Kevin, thank you very much for this evening. If I can start with you, please.
Basically, as I've summarised at the start of the call, we're open for business. We're a strong team. We can deal with you in multiple different languages. We're looking forward to a very strong 2025 as a company. So we look forward to hearing from you. And I know that, Jonathan, you're going to be sharing the contact details for each of us after the call. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening, and good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It's been a pleasure to have you, as always. Francisco, thank you for your input. Yes, leave our audience with some tasters of your knowledge.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar. We are a team of 8 people based here in Mallorca, but we provide services all over Spain. Our office has been up and running for 15 years, and we only do real estate advice. We don't do any other law. All we do is real estate. So we're highly specialized on buying, selling, advising developers, construction contracts, leasing, whatever. So give us a shout if you need help in Spain. We're more than happy to help. One brief comment to one of the questions that you mentioned earlier before. One of the persons asked if they could throw an offer subject to a sale of a property somewhere else. this will never be accepted, as well as will never be accepted a contract subject to obtaining a mortgage. No one is not of practice. So it's good to get in touch with a mortgage broker, as Kevin, to at least get the finance ready beforehand, or while you're drafting the or while we're drafting the contract. So this is important. It's a piece of advice.
Thank you very much, Francisco. You've been a wealth of information tonight, and yes, again, shows the importance of being in touch directly with the panelists. And as Kevin mentioned, we'll be showing all of the panelists' contact information for you to speak directly with them and answer any of the questions we've not been able to get through. Mo, we were just handing over to each of the panelists for a little outro, just to give a flavour of your knowledge and leave the audience with a snapshot before they go.
Okay, I think the most important thing I would, or a piece of advice is, and we see it a lot, is before you go shopping for a property, really have it well defined in terms of what is your budget. And I think clients a lot of the time are surprised with actually how far their budget can go. Maybe there's a bit of a perception in terms of interest rates, because again, if they're coming from the UK or the US, where the cost of borrowing tends to be higher, they're a little bit put off by the cost of the capital. And I think that's one thing that Spain has done very, very well in terms of the rates are very attractive. They're very pro lending the money as well. So I think that would be my piece of advice. So always get in contact with a bank or a broker to really understand how far your borrowing power is, and then obviously meet with a good quality agent and take the property search from there.
Fantastic advice. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. It's been a really enjoyable evening. As I say, we'll be sharing a recording and also all of the panelists' contact details. I'm back to get my woolly hat on, my scarf and gloves, and go and brave the 1 degree in London and dream of my own property in Spain perhaps one day. But thank you very much, audience, for joining us. Hope you've had a good evening. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Good night.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye-bye.